Marcus Garvey inspired African people by teaching them that their history did not begin with slavery. He taught them of the great civilization and empires that were established in Eastern Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Egypt, Sudan. Then in West Africa, he had Ghana, Songhai, and Mali, not forgetting Zimbabwe in the South. His message galvanized the people together towards the UNIACL, which embarked on the ambitious projects to employ its members. It also focused the minds of the people on the decolonization and liberation of Africa. Garvey's movement influenced future African leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, and Nnamdi Azikiwe. If we now fast forward to 2020, the generation that was influenced by Marcus Garvey has passed. The enthusiasm and independence has waned, and we now have 54 countries on the African continent, all struggling for survival. All attempts at African unity has either been delayed, compromised, or watered down. In Ghana, African Union Day was celebrated on the 25th of May. It used to be a public holiday, but now the holiday has been abolished. On the continent, we have 8 regional economic communities, i.e. ECOWAS, ECCAS, SADC, etc. 5 of these regional economic communities are supposedly fully active. The RECs form the pillars of the African economic communities. In March 2018, 49 African countries signed the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, paving the way for a continent-wide free trade area. Free trade area means that the free trade member companies involve cooperations between each other to reduce trade barriers, import quotas and tariffs, and to increase trade of goods and services with each other. People will also be free to move between the countries. It will be an open border. It should be an open border. My question is, where does the 6th region, states of the African diaspora, fits into all of this? Within the African Union, there are 6 regions: North Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, plus one last region, the 6th region, which constitute the African diaspora. At the 2011 Global African Diaspora Summit, a declaration was released reiterating the relevance of the 6th region. The document called on African diaspora representatives to galvanize and organize themselves in regional and networks and establish appropriate mechanism that will enable their increased participation in the affairs of the African Union as observers, and eventually in the future as a 6th region of the continent that would contribute substantially to the implementation of policies and programs. I take it the African diasporans are still observing, because we are not contributing substantively as yet to any African policies or programs. So we are still on the observation regime. Despite declarations of inclusion, the 6th region has yet to gain traction and relevance. The practicalities of involving the diaspora in the affairs of the AU have proven more problematic than originally envisaged. Efforts to include the diaspora has taken the forms of creating the AU Department of Citizens and Diaspora Organization and offer a seat in the Economic, Social and Cultural Council, and the creation of regional entities in North Africa, Europe, and Latin America. Yet significant barriers for the sixth region, the states of the African diaspora, to participate in the affairs of Africa, to create African unity still persist. The Economic, Social and Cultural Council, the only permanent AU organ with diaspora representation. However, despite the enthusiasm of the African diaspora as reflected in the establishment of various diaspora networks, the actualization of their representation in this organization still remains evasive. The 5 geographical regions under which the AU is operating are only practical during the AU organ sessions, in which the African diaspora is not represented. This is due primarily to Article 29, Paragraph 1 of the 2000 Constitutive Act of the AU, which limits membership of African countries. So in actual fact, membership of African countries are involved in those forums, but the African diaspora are not involved because they are not classed as African countries. So because of these restrictions, the state of the African diaspora continue to be observers rather than significant and active participant of the African Union or the growth of the continent of Africa. There is now little or no open discussion about African unity that includes the sixth African Union region. Each region is given the mandate to look after their regions. The state of African region is now regarded as African, therefore cannot participate in African dialogue, but rather be observers. Recently, Ghana was awarded the headquarters of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The general feeling is that this is done more for historical, emotional reasons based around the legacy of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the political stability of Ghana. There is no enthusiasm or discussion about regional free trade integration. This was demonstrated by recent demands by Ghanaian traders for Nigerian traders to be banned from trading in local markets. How can African free trade be successful when there continue to be border constraints, language constraints, and currency constraints? These constraints were enforced on us by the colonial regime, specifically designed to divide and rule. Therefore, for the development and the industrialization of Africa, we must aim to dismantle these constraints one by one. However, the challenges for us are: how do we rekindle interest in Pan-Africanism and Black unity? How do we reignite the flames that burnt in the hearts of our forefathers? How do we get Africans home and abroad to realize and acknowledge how dependent we are on each other? We alone are our own rise. We alone can determine the time, the pace, and the place of our economic development. How do we wean our African leaders from the addiction of begging the West for help for capital, economic and national master planning, strategic and technical support? How do we get our African leaders to understand that these entities, the World Bank, the IMF, et cetera, works exactly as they were designed to accomplish, to inhibit African modernization. Name me a country in Africa where a significant presence of Oxfam, UNICEF, Save the Children have reduced poverty and built shared prosperity. I can't think of one country. Yes, and yet these organizations perpetuate and proliferate Africa. How do we make our people understand the philosophies and guiding principles that of their so-called developmental partners, our colonialized nation, under the guise of friendship through infrastructure development programs? The African Union does not have a macroeconomic plan to unite Africa industrially, but relies on planning influenced by foreign powers like the Chinese and Western institution. This has failed Africa for a long time because the answers are not homegrown and do not address our realities. Every nation can design and drive its future much more effectively without outside assistance. This is a quote from the Riot Act by Professor Mombeawa. The Marcus Messiah Garvey Foundation suggests that we embark on another campaign to sell Africa to Africans, similar to how Marcus Garvey sold blackness to Black people 100 years ago. A few months ago, the MMGF decided to redesign its website. It contracted the job to a young lady from Nigeria. We decided that we would make the site very African-centered and use it to promote African themes. We sent all the graphic materials to the web designer. The web designer told us that she never knew that there were so many beautiful places in Africa. She vowed that she would do more traveling in Africa and see more beautiful places. This experience shows us how little we know about ourselves and how we undervalue what we have. We recommend that the African Union and Pan-African Organization embark on a campaign to sell Africa to Africans, particularly to the youths. We propose that there should be a Pan-African organization in every African country who is tasked with selling Africa to Africans. Ideally, this should be sanctioned and coordinated by the African Union. So for example, the Marcus Messiah Garvey Foundation, who is based in Ghana, could be responsible for promoting Zimbabwe in December. We would find Zimbabweans living in Ghana and promote their culture, stories, and experience. Then in January, we will promote Ethiopia. We'll do the same for them. So every month, each country could feature a different African country to promote. We could also feature countries from the Caribbean and South America that has large Black population. These countries are part of the AU 6 region. Recently, the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute proposed a Pan-African reading and writing club. We suggest that the two ideas can work together. We believe that the people of Africa are separated because of a lack of knowledge of each other. By highlighting our commonalities and interdependency, we can improve the walls, we can remove the walls of xenophobia and suspicions. Now, I would like to close my presentation and leave you with 3 well-known Jamaican phrases that we use. The first one, beg water can't cook cow skin. And what that simply means is a nation can never develop if it continues to beg. It will never be enough for you to make progress. Whatever you beg for, you get enough to keep your head above water, but it's not to improve you. The other phrase that I have is what a feel can't be unfeel, right? And that simply means is what is yours cannot be taken away from you. Africa is for Africans home and abroad. So who can dare to take it away from us? My third phrase, Jamaican phrase, is "Dopi no hufi frighten." And what that means is that as a collective, we are strong. Bullies pick on those who can defend themselves. I'll continue. My third phrase is "Dopi no hufi frighten." And the meaning I say is, as a collective, we are strong. Bullies pick on those who can defend themselves the least. So if we continue to be separated, if we continue to be individualistic as a sovereignty of 54 countries, then we will continue to be.
All our dear be able to get what the speakers are saying. Kindly mute your audios as you enter. Next time I'll be calling names so that you know we are addressing you. Thank you very much. Please, Ma'am Mariam, please go ahead. Yes. Madam Mariam, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. Now, as I said, my final statement was that "Dopi no hufi frighten." That's a well-known Jamaican phrase that we use to basically show that if you are working as a collective, then you are stronger. So that's what we need to be working towards, African unity, to make ourselves strong so that the bullies do not continue to bully us. That is my final statement.
Madam Mariam, oh my God. I want to believe that our audience and participants from all across Facebook and here on Zoom are quite actually elated and very excited to engage with you on what you said. And I really liked, the famous phrases that you closed with, because they speak really closely to us as Africans. And, just to reiterate briefly, what you spoke about is the issue of trade. You mentioned that how are we going to, realize the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement if we continue to close our borders, if we continue to, to prevent a free movement of goods and persons across the continent, if we continue, to use several currencies. I mean, you go to Botswana, I'm using the Pula, and for me to go to Ghana, I have to change into a Ghana cedis, right? Yes, cedi. And then if I go to South Africa, I have to use the South African rand and all of that. Why are we not coming together and use just the one currency? And I want to believe that that is actually one of the flagship projects of the Africa Agenda 2063. Thank you so much. And at this point in time, I would like to just take about 5 minutes to take 2 questions from Facebook and on Zoom to so that you can address some of those questions. That is, if there are questions. Do we have questions? Great. Okay, we're asking the questions. I don't believe that we have any right now, but do we have any on Facebook? Yes, okay. No, that is fine. So with that, Madam Mariam, thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you said. And perhaps maybe let me just close with one of my favorite quotes that you phrases that you just mentioned. I think one that I absolutely love, I mean, I love all of them, but the number two, you said that what is yours cannot be you. And you applaud, I mean, you implore to make sure, yes.
The term is, what I feel cannot be unfeel. And it simply means what is yours cannot be not yours. Africa is designated for Africans. It has always been African. So there's no one can take control of Africa. Africa belongs to Africa. Yes, African belong to Africa. What I feel cannot be unfeel.
What I feel cannot be unfeel. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Madam Mariam, for that. Very, very exciting indeed. Yes, we would like to actually, you know, I keep on asking you some of the questions as the webinar goes on. And ladies and gentlemen, just like that, I would like for you who are on Zoom just to, you know, go there and show some hands that we're clapping hands for Madam Mariam, and my audience here will definitely also.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a time to be alive, really. What a time to be alive. And thank you so much. Oh my God, I'm excited, and I want to believe that my participants are just equally excited as I am. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let me now go on our program. At this point in time, we're going to to be introducing Professor Tiro Sibina, who is the African literature lecturer at University of Botswana. And for him, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to be talking to us about the role of education in promoting Pan-African ideals, that is African education imperatives. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, before he takes on, I would like to just notify you that yes, Professor Lumumba just joined us, and we would like to welcome you, sir, to the webinar. We're very, very excited to have you. So, ladies and gentlemen, he's muted. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just go back to Professor Tiro Sibina. Professor, we welcome you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes. Thank you. Yes, sir. Tell us about, the African education imperatives in relation to promoting Pan-Africanism ideologies in the continent.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Greetings, everybody. I hope this is.
Yes, you're very audible.
Right.
Yes.
Let me, having listened to such a wonderful presentation, I feel inspired, and I would just like to kickstart the discussion, my bit of the discussion contribution by also paying homage to Marcus Garvey's idea that with confidence, if you have confidence at the very beginning, then you've already won half the battle. So in this struggle, confidence is crucial. So I take it that the role of education is quite vital. It's of central importance in the project of not only liberating Africa, uniting Africa, and also ensuring the advancement of Africa. So I would like to reiterate the idea that unity is strength, and that self-knowledge is crucial, and the fact that Africa belongs to Africans at home and abroad. So I have a poem called Young Africa, which is dedicated to the future of Africa, and in that poem I stress the fact that the African future or African young people, African youth have to know their history, and they have to tread and walk this earth with confidence, because the ground that they walk on is solidified by history. So they wander and home come as they please. So in the project of crucial project, vitally important project of reimagining Pan-African principles, education plays a crucial role. And as you've heard, one of the aspects of that is that self-knowledge is important. We need to know our history, learn the history of Africa, and also rest assured that Africa is the cradle of human civilization. And even in Southern Africa, where we are, the arts, education itself, all aspects of human life. Since this is the cradle, this is the rest of the world. Of Africa, human civilization, that's the cradle of civilization. So, in terms of reclaiming our heritage, education is quite. There was light here about reading, the reading, writing, art. So it's quite important that we learn our history and know that our legacy is quite strong, starting with the leaders from Kwame Nkrumah to Julius Nyerere, Nelson Mandela, Alex Obukwe, whether it's Thomas Sankara, we stand on a stupendously rich heritage. So this issue of knowledge and education and ideological fortification and is quite crucial. So we need to know ourselves, Africans, know each other in terms of geography, in terms of history, and culture, and those of you read Walter Rodney's How Europe and Africa would know. When it comes to the arts, especially music, specifically drums. Africa is the continent of drums. So we need to emphasize the place of the arts, of literature, of the sciences, knowing very well that even university, the first university since Africa is the cradle of university, the first universities were in ancient universities were in Africa. People used to come from, the African philosophy originates from, philosophy originates even before the Greeks and the Romans, and all that people looked to Africa for, the idea of thinking. So we need to, as we grapple with the issues such as indigenous knowledge systems and decolonizing universities. If you remember, 2015, I do salute the youth of young people of making courageous, brave attempts at decolonizing the universities. It's not only 2015, but it's also 1976, and the Soweto uprising. So all these things have to be remembered, because what we need in this struggle, in this project, is to sharpen our memory. Sharpening our memory by reclaiming our history, which involves reclaiming our space, our land, our air, our seas, our economies, reclaiming what I call our history or heritage. So it's important to know about the pre-colonial, how African development was interrupted by colonialism. And we also need to spend time studying colonialism, not only that, but also have an awareness of what prevailed before colonialism, that we have a long history, and our history transcends or predates the imperialist or colonial interpretation. So it's important for young people to know. So the names that I've just mentioned, whether it's Nkrumah or Fanon from the Caribbean, who also claimed and played a crucial role in the liberation of Africa, that we need to continue with the liberation, to continue the liberation struggle, because as Kwame Nkrumah pointed out, independence, political independence remains an illusion if there is in the absence of socio-economic content to that liberation or independence. So in other words, it's important to inject that socio-economic content.
Absolutely. Professor Sabina, not to interrupt you, and what I wanted to ask you is, in your own point of view, from your own point of view, really, is the educational system today, currently, what is it doing to prepare Africans for what? What is it doing really to prepare Africans? You look at Pan-Africanism. It was started by academia. These are brilliant men who were still at school and all of them. They came together and they said, listen, we have to use what we know now to go and liberate our people. And so academia came together. And then what they actually said, the curriculum that we are currently, using to educate the 21st century, a young person, or the 21st century African, is the same curricula that the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Marcus Garveys back in the days actually, set up. What is it that today, speaking to the current, educational system, what is it doing to prepare an African today? And then secondly, talking about, Ubuntu as a very, very, pertinent value to Pan-Africanism. Isn't it time that we actually saw such principles, to the core, not only being spoken about as Ubuntu, like literally as if it's a term that actually doesn't have a meaning? Isn't it time that we saw it actually even being embedded in as a core of our curriculum? One of our innovators here in Botswana, they came up with an initiative. It's a technological initiative and or rather is a campaign that they called it Ubuntu. And Ubuntu, they are trying to take the Pan-African, ideal or value of Ubuntu, and are trying to incorporate that on our internet usage on a day-to-day basis. And I love the fact that they took it to the kids. They took it down there where we actually need to start, the systematic approach that we need to, to look into. What is it that, do you think that such values is something that we should really get serious about them and go back to curricula and go back to the foundations and start teaching our kids about such principles and what they actually mean in order for them to come and understand, as they grow up, the values of Pan-Africanism and what we actually need to do going forward?
Yes, okay. Yeah, for me, philosophy begins and ends with Ubuntu. So there is need to foreground and highlight the philosophy of Ubuntu, because that's where philosophy begins. So it speaks to the idea of confidence and self-knowledge and reclaiming our minds, sharpening our memories, and clarifying our vision. So in the process of reclaiming the schools, the educational spaces, because it is a struggle, it is something that we have to fight for, and the struggle doesn't begin today. It's something that has been waged by brilliant minds such as the historian Walter Rodney, another historian C.L.R. James, another doctor of the mind is Frantz Fanon, people like Thomas Sankara also played their part. So it's crucial to regard schools, educational hubs, as not only places for creativity, for innovation and all that, but education itself is political in essence. So the schools themselves are undergoing, if there are schools or universities, are undergoing some kind of transformation. And as the struggle led by the South African youth is about decolonization of the curriculum. And decolonization of the curriculum would mean mainstreaming and placing Africa at the very center of our conceptual, ideological struggle. And the question of unity also is relevant there. The schools themselves, not only the countries, but the schools themselves have to create linkages. Universities, African universities also have to find ways of establishing linkages, and collaborative endeavors are crucial here. Yeah. So the transformation of the curriculum itself is central to this project. There is the notion of indigenous knowledge systems.
Yes.
Yeah, that is also part of decolonizing the curriculum and also placing Africa at the center of our educational endeavor. So it's hard work that involves encouraging young people, future researchers and scholars to place Africa at the very center of their knowledge-seeking activities. So instead of seeking validation from elsewhere, from Europe, so this lack of knowledge of each other is something that we need to remedy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, whether it's Zambia or South Africa, Namibia, what is neighborliness? What is Ubuntu if Botswana and Namibia are at each other's throat?
Absolutely.
What is going on in Zimbabwe or in South Africa? How do we tackle the economic challenges? How do we tackle the challenges that have to do with technological advancement, scientific advancement? How do we instill that sense of confidence in our young people? So culture is crucial. Coming from the field of African literature, African writers have been at the forefront of this cultural struggle. You mentioned Achebe, Nuruddin Farah. They've been doing quite well, whether it's Aigwe Amar in his The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, seeing how long Africa cares to its leaders. They have been waging a consistent and admirable struggle.
Absolutely.
So African literature, so I wouldn't want to say just to dwell on literature, there's music as well. Yeah, so people of African origin have been doing quite well, making us proud to the world. So
Thank you so much.
the Pan-African project is not confined to Africa itself. It's a global project. So this process of consciousness raising has to continue, and it has to be applauded. We only have to read African literature, not only African literature that's written in European languages, but African literature that's written in indigenous languages. So the struggle again for language, because our knowledge is locked in foreign languages. So we have to unlock those prisons, those linguistic prisons, and liberate our own languages. So a lot of work has to be done. First, we start with our modes of self-expression. So the linguistic struggle is crucial, it's central to this struggle, so that we listen and speak to each other, look back. That's why I kept on talking about sharpening our memory and also clarifying our vision, and also learning the art of creating alliances amongst the African nations.
Absolutely.
We need to be alive to the fact that we are divided. If there's division, then I've been talking about clarity of vision. But now there are these artificial colonial boundaries that we have to be aware of, and we should know that we should always historicize and create awareness about the boundaries that set us apart.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you
there are
so
not only
much.
physical boundaries, but there are also linguistic, conceptual boundaries. So those are some of the hurdles that we need.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you so much.
Professor. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, as you see, such a very interesting, or rather such a very interesting point that Professor Sabina raised there, and talking to self-education. Do you know yourself as an African? And he said that we cannot pursue or we cannot attain Pan-African, mandate if we keep on, if Botswana does not understand Malawi, does not understand South Africa, or does not understand Nigeria. It means that we will always, find it very difficult for us to come together and form allies in terms of moving forward, in terms of, attaining the Pan-African mandate that we are supposed to be, moving or pursuing as Africans, and particularly looking at the issue of youth there. And, earlier on before the conversation, I had a chat with a friend of mine who is currently pursuing his master's in childhood education. And he did mention, that to the most part, the aspect of Pan-Africanism and it being actually taught from grassroots, at childhood level, teaching young people what Pan-Africanism is, not what we know has been already going, but teaching young people, our children, what is Pan-Africanism. We don't have to keep on struggling for now as we are now teenagers and all of that, to now go back and have to now understand our history, understand ourselves, and all of that. So I found that quite very, very important that we employ systematic approaches, to education when it comes to particularly the aspect of Pan-Africanism. So ladies and gentlemen, I do not know if we have any other questions right now on the Zoom platform for Professor Sabina. If not, I would like to literally, I know it is time for us to have Professor Lumumba due to the time constraint. We're supposed to be on a break, last break, especially for us here who are gathered due to COVID-19, just to to take a break and just walk around and make sure that the room is still good for us to continue this conversation. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, let me just quickly check if we have any questions, and then we can quickly just, maybe even come back and address those at a later stage in time. So can you go down? Is that all? Yeah, great. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, please, for you who are joining us visually on Facebook, on Zoom, just hold it right there. Take a break for 5 minutes or less, and then we'll be coming back to continue this very, very important conversation on reimagining Africa. Reimagining Pan-Africanism and in the pursuit for political freedom or political liberation. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that 5 minutes or even 4, and then we'll be back. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. discussions on our webinar today. And at this point in time, I would like to really also welcome you once again to this webinar organized by the PLO Foundation, or rather the PLO Lumumba Foundation, as well as the African Union Youth Charter, in collaboration with the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic embassy here in Botswana. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking reimagining Pan-Africanism and looking at the pursuit really of political liberation in Africa. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that, let me just quickly check if our next speaker is currently available.
I'm available. I may make my intervention.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, we next in our program, we are going to be having Professor PLO Lumumba, who is going to be, who is rather the founding president of the PLO Lumumba Foundation, as well as a consultant at the Lumumba and Lumumba Advocates, as well as a member of the Africa Justice Group. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be talking about Pan-Africanism, reimagined in the 21st century, pursuit of continental political independence, and looking at Africa Cooperation, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, and what really we need to do going forward. So, Professor Lumumba, we welcome you, sir, to this webinar.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me start by appreciating and acknowledging those who have spoken before me, and you who have been involved in organizing this webinar. And I wish our colleagues from the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, we continue to recognize your struggle against the administration in Rabat, and we believe that in the fullness of time, Sahrawi will be liberated, because we appreciate that even as we talk about the reimagination of Pan-Africanism, we must recognize that there are still vestiges of colonization which must be taken out of the continent of Africa. In addressing this particular subject, one may be tempted to go into history, to talk about the early activities of Marcus Garvey, the various meetings culminating in the 1945 Manchester meeting. But I'll not do that. I think that can be read by the listeners. What I'll do is to simply highlight some of the critical issues, particularly at this time, and my intervention will be informed by existing thoughts, some of which have been articulated. But let me start a little early as 1906. As early as 1906, in Colombia, one of the pioneer freedom fighters of Africa, Pixley Kaisaka Seme, delivered a speech at the University of Columbia, and it was titled The Regeneration of Africa. It is instructive that it is on the basis of that statement that in 1912, Pixley Kaisaka Seme, jointly with other stalwarts such as Albert Lutuli, founded the African National Congress in South Africa. And at that time, of course, the regime of apartheid had not been institutionalized, which it was later to be institutionalized under Hendrik Verwoerd in 1948. And it's always important to situate our conversation in history, because sometimes we may imagine that the struggle to regain our independence only started in earnest in the 1950s. History is replete with examples in the 18th century when the colonized peoples of Africa were resisting the colonizers. That is how you can understand the Herero massacres in Namibia. It was resistance. That is how you can understand the battles of the Blood River in South Africa. That is how you can understand the Mau Mau struggle. That is how you can understand Queen Zinga of the Batamba in Angola and her exploits against the Portuguese. That is how you can understand the monies of the Dahomey Amazons in present-day Benin, so that it must be understood that there was resistance. Initially, the resistance was from the east with the Arab invaders at that time. Then, of course, it was against the European invaders who initially came into the continent as traders, such as the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the British, the French, the Germans, the Belgians, the Italians. But it's important to note that a number of things happened in the world after the World War II. After the World War II and the emergence of the United States of America as the international hegemon, the struggle for regaining or granting independence, depending on who you are talking to, was catalyzed and energized. And you therefore see at that time that countries outside of the continent of Africa, such as India, regaining their independence, and greater activity within the continent of Africa almost everywhere, culminating, as we know, in Ghana regaining her independence and that famous speech in March of 1957 by Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, in which he said, and this was said by the good professor, that the independence of Ghana would be an illusion if the rest of Africa was not independent. And you remember his famous words, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, the rest will be granted unto you." And that is why in 1958, in the month of December, Kwame Nkrumah convenes the meeting of the then independent African countries, and there were very few at that time. And he reminds his audience at that time that it is critical that we must characterize and recognize the imperialist. He says that the imperialist does not change. It does not change its character, it changes its strategy and tactics. But it has two handmaidens, colonization and neocolonization. Nkrumah is quite clear in 1958, and in 1960, there is then held another meeting in Casablanca, Morocco. And you can see that even in those early days, the colonizers and the neo-colonizers have started what they do up to now to divide us. They divide the independence leaders with those who are normally referred to as the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group. The Casablanca group are the ones who recognize that you need independence now. And of course, the Monrovia group were led by Tubman at that time and Felix Houphouët-Boigny, whom we know was a lackey of the French, to take another trajectory, culminating in the May 24th to 25th meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at which we now have 32 independent countries. And there are speeches there. All of them gave marvelous speeches. If you listen to Haile Selassie, you listen to Julius Kambarage Nyerere or Kwame Nkrumah, but the iconic speech, even on that day, is Nkrumah's speech. And he speaks with passion and a sense of urgency. He reminds the audience that if we do not unite, and he's not naive about unity, he's not saying that we will then become one homogeneous thing. He recognizes the diversity and the heterogeneity of the continent, but says there are certain critical things which, if we focus on, will put us in a better state to resist the pernicious and now subterranean activities of the erstwhile colonizer. Let us have one currency. Let us have one army command. Let us have one government. Let us have one common market. Let us begin to trade. Let us treat these boundaries which were arbitrarily drawn not as barriers, but as bridges. Of course, he did not carry the day, others saying that we should have a gradual approach. We end up with the Organization of African Unity, which was a very loose union, susceptible to manipulation. And I therefore always describe that phase of removing the colonizers as the first liberation to decolonize. But even then it was not uniform. You and me know that until 1994, South Africa was under the aegis of the apartheid regime. You and me know that even as we speak now, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic is under the control of Morocco, who, as you know, in 1975, entered into the arena following the departure of the Spaniards and continue to behave as if they are the hegemon in that part of the world. Of course, we are also aware of the activities of Polisario and the declaration of their independence in 1976. That tells you that even the project of decolonization is not complete. We also know the story of the Ambazonians who are trying to liberate themselves from the hegemonic activities of the Biya regime in Yaoundé. We also know that until 2011, there was the issue of Southern Sudan, and there are many things. But if you allow me to be simplistic about it, to the extent that saying that we did indeed almost 90% appear to regain political liberation. And I'm using the word appear very deliberately because if you look at many African countries, even the political liberation that we got is gone. Look at the former French colonies. In their minds and in the minds of many of their leaders, they are essentially still territories of France, what they used to call territoire d'outre-mer. They still consider themselves as foreign territories of France, including their bank accounts being fundamentally controlled from Paris, and even their CFA franc being manipulated from Paris. Even that has been lost. And even if you look at the conduct of many European ambassadors in Africa, they still behave like the governors did during the colonial period. They tell us how to conduct elections, they rebuke us, they reprimand us, they warn us that if we don't behave in a certain way, pain will be visited upon us. And we too, depending on who colonized you, when anything happens, you run to Lisbon if you are in Angola, you run to London if you are colonized by the British, you run to Paris, you run to Brussels, you run to Madrid, or you run to Rome. So there is a sense in which even when we talk about that phase, you can see that colonization actually transformed into neo-colonization. And Nkrumah once again was very clear in saying that the erstwhile colonizer will come back as the investor. And he came back in a very clever way. In the 1980s, you will remember when the Bretton Woods institution came back to Africa with a bang, with the structural adjustment programs. And they decimated our economies. If you went to Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, all economies were decimated. Africa became the guinea pig for ideas by young economists from Harvard and other Western universities. And it is instructive in order to understand this. And I'm saying this to lay a basis for why I think we must redefine and reimagine Pan-Africanism. Look at what they do in terms of always ensuring that they have a tab on us. They have, as I've said, the structural adjustment program, but as early as 1975, you also see the European Union coming up with the Lomé Convention for African and Pacific countries, and then the Cotonou Convention, so that they continue to control our markets. Africans realized this. And in 1980, the African Union meets in Lagos, Nigeria, and comes up with the Africa Plan of Action. The whole idea behind the Africa Plan of Action is to ensure that we do what Nkrumah said in 1963, that we trade more with each other, that we link our markets, that we ensure that we lift tariff and non-tariff barriers. And you remember, this is during the period of GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and other things, which is succeeded by the WTO. And you can see that the neo-colonial project is very subtle. And because there is no time, you can see it coming in different economic arrangements, Africa Growth Opportunity, AGOA, all these things. The net effect is, even when we think we are now in the second liberation of dealing with neo-colonialism, it acquires another tactic. And you can see how Africa is described very conveniently. We started by being the third world. Then we stopped being the third world. We became developing countries. Then we stopped being developing countries. Then we were given another countries, and they also changed. They were donors. They now became development partners. They look for another name. They're always getting these names, which are designed to hoodwink us and lull us into a false sense of security. And whenever we come together, there is always one thing that has rung in our minds, and is always there, that we must rethink. The new African NEPAD, which then comes in, these are initiatives during the Mbeki era and Obasanjo and Bouteflika in Algeria. The recognition that there must be something new in Africa, that Africa must think. And in 1990s, when OAU transitions into the African Union, it is in itself a statement that African Union or African countries must think differently. And you see a number of initiatives, as I've already said, NEPAD, you see the rethinking of the African Union, you see the coming up of quite a number of initiatives to address agriculture. We know what happened in the Malabo decision, the Maputo decision, Open Skies, Yamoussoukro, the Abuja Declaration on issues of health. Africa is trying to come together because Africa knows that political liberation is not sufficient, that you need economic liberation, that you need social cohesion, and that you want to go beyond sentimentalism. You know, there is always the tendency sometimes that when we talk about Pan-Africanism, we are likely to drown ourselves in philosophizing Pan-Africanism, intellectualizing Pan-Africanism, moralizing Pan-Africanism, and sentimentalizing Pan-Africanism. In my own view, Pan-Africanism must be understood in a very simple way. One, the recognition that we were rudely and arbitrarily divided, and that it is necessary for us to recognize that Pan-Africanism means our working together as a unit in our diversity in order to realize the dividends of our independence and politically, economically, socially, culturally, and spiritually. It's a total package. And that requires, among other things, that we regain self-confidence. Because one of the things that colonization did, and what slavery before it did, and what neo-colonial project did, was to undermine our self-confidence, so that we feel inferior, and we feel that things that are African are inferior. And you'll see, even we who are sitting here and who are listening, sometimes we think so. We think that the clothes made in Italy are better, the perfumes made in Paris are better, the chocolate made in Switzerland are better, the things, the hair made in Brazil is better, the things made in China are better, and our African things are never good enough. Our languages are not good enough. Zulu is not good. Setswana is not good. Your intelligence is measured on your ability to speak English without an accent. Those are things that are deeply seated in our psyche. And when the good professor talked about education, this is what he was talking about. And when you posed the question to him, was it not the same curriculum that Nkrumah or Modibo or everybody else went through? It is, but there was a residual consciousness. That residual consciousness is what we want to reawaken, and to reawaken it in a manner that informs how we relate with the rest of the world. We are not saying that Pan-Africanism means that we no longer are part of the globe. We are simply saying that we will be a part of the globe, present at the dinner table or the lunch table of human civilization, not as waiters to serve other civilizations as we have done, no, but as diners to play a part in determining what ought to be on the table. And this can only happen if we energize people of Africa across the world. And this is where the diaspora comes in. That the diaspora, we have over 250 million people who belong to the continent of Africa by dint of their ancestry. And they must now do what they must do. They must ensure that their love for Africa is beyond sentimentalism. And I'm happy that that is beginning to happen. That is not just a year of return. No, it is beyond the year of return. It is coming to Africa and beginning to participate in her activities, so that I would want to see that Hollywood, don't think that Hollywood is something that just entertains. Hollywood is a propaganda, is a propaganda too. You watch too many movies from there. Africa is defined by Hollywood. They bring you Wakanda, but is that Africa, or is that as they see Africa? They create Tarzan for us. I would want to see Nollywood being replaced by Afrowood, and I think I am beginning to see the seeds of that through Nollywood in Nigeria. I'm beginning to see that through Bongowood and Riverwood, because cultural dominance is also a very powerful thing that you must work on. I would want to see our music. Why is it that, one of the things that the Americans have done very successfully, they play basketball in their own country, in America. And then when one team wins, they say they are the world champions. Which world? It is America. They play baseball themselves, and then they say those people are the champions of the world. They have wrestling. They wrestle amongst themselves. Then they say they are champions of the world. That is propagandization of sports, of all these things. You who are sitting here, young Africans, are busy watching Manchester United. You can count the player and what they ate the night before. But if I ask them what is the capital of this Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, they do not know. They do not know the capital. They do not know that there is another, a de facto one and another one. They have no idea. They don't even know the name of the country, Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, even those who have gone to school. In other words, we must decolonize our minds in order to redefine our Pan-Africanism. Then we must also have a lingua franca. And when we talk about a lingua franca, we are not saying that we kill all the other language. We are saying that in order to ease communication, there is wisdom in having a dominant language. And Kiswahili is emerging as such. I think it is. And that does not mean that Hausa or Fulfude or Arabic for the person in the north or Setswana will die. No, it doesn't. But it simply means that those are the things that we must focus on. And because I must conclude, when we are reimagining Africa, we are not saying that we are losing the fundamental. The DNA of Pan-Africanism remains the same. The DNA remains the same. We are simply saying that the circumstances demand that we think differently and act differently. And look, for example, how the Chinese are slowly creeping into Africa. And the good professor, when you talked about education, I hope at your university you do not have a Confucius Institute. Perhaps you do because you don't have practical control. But why do you think that the Chinese are financing Confucius Institutes? It is deliberate, it is slow. In the next 20 years, our young men and women in the middle class will be speaking Mandarin. they'll be thinking like Chinese. Their intellectual and economic true north will have shifted from Washington to Beijing and Shenzhen and to Shanghai. And that is why even when you go to hotels, even there in Gaborone, you see the clocks are set. The clocks are set. They tell you the time in London, the time in Rome, the time in New York. They never tell you the time in Nairobi or in Rabat. Oh, they don't, or in Lagos, because our intellectual true north, our economic true north, our cultural true north is still controlled by the colonizer. And you young people who therefore are the ones who holding all factors constant are going to be here for longer. It is important that you must re-energize yourself by looking at the original agenda of Pan-Africanism. Wave 1 was decolonization. Wave 2 was to deal with neocolonization. Wave 3 was to liberate ourselves from the shackles of poverty, ignorance, and economic want so that we can participate in wave 4, which is now industrialization, so that we can earn the dividends of the 4th industrial revolution. We can now participate at the level of mobile telephony, the big data, the things that we are talking about, and we trade amongst ourselves. We break down the barriers. And I want to conclude that there is a sense in which we have recognized this. The very creation of Africa Agenda 2063 was in itself an acknowledgement that we need to define our agenda and tell our story. The emergence of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which begins to operate in Ghana in the first week of January, is also a realization that we must create our own market. And these are critical milestones. But remember that milestones in and of themselves are not enough. It is important that we must all roll up our sleeves and let's have all hands on deck. I'm now seeing some of the writings on Africa Continental Free Trade are by Europeans. Brexit, the French, the Americans. So they are beginning to provide intellectual leadership ways for Africa Continental Free Trade Area so that when it begins, when we break down the barriers, the goods that we will be marketing will be French goods, will be goods from Europe. They'll situate their industries in our countries to beat the local content thing. They'll recruit a few Africans into their companies to give the face that they want. So in a nutshell, I'm saying, this is the time that we must tell our story. And that means that in all sectors, and I'm repeating this for effect, we must be present in culture. Whose music are we playing? Whose drama, whose art are we articulating? Whose sports are we promoting? Whose economy are we working at? Which politics are we playing? Culturally, what are we doing? Spiritually, how are we re-energizing ourselves? And I believe that if we do all these things and many others that others will mention, then there is a sense in which we will rediscover ourselves and we will have an Africa that is a true participant in the affairs of the world. I conclude once again by saying that Africa is going through a crisis. I cannot end without saying this. Right now, this is the year of the silencing of the guns. As I speak to you now, there is an ease in Mozambique, and I am happy that SADC has said that they are going to do something about it. There is an ease in Somalia. I know they are holding their elections. I hope that it will be a good election. There's been conflict in Ethiopia, and the government has now gone into Mekele, and we hope that beyond that, there'll be no guerrilla activity, there'll be a rapprochement. There is an ease in Southern Sudan. There is an ease in the Nuba Mountains and in Abyei and Darfur. There is an ease in Eastern Congo. There is conflict in, as you know, in Central African Republic. You know, there's a problem in Burkina Faso. Though they concluded their election, they couldn't penetrate the northern part. You know, there is problem in Ambazonia in Cameroon. You know, there is a problem in northern Mali. You know that there is a problem in Libya. You know that there is the unresolved issue of Sahrawi, which, you know, led Morocco to leave the African Union. Then they came back again. We hope that this particular issue will be resolved even as we talk about Pan-Africanism. And you young people must go out there and play your part. It will be well with us. We cannot fail. It can only be delayed. It cannot be denied. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Oh my God. Oh my God, ladies and gentlemen, not only am I very proud to say, you know, the lady that you see here is actually learning from the best. That is PLO. He's my mentor, of course, I have to say that. But however, you know, he mentioned quite very key notes that I want to believe that young Africans across the continent who are participating in this webinar, you know, there's a lot of takeaways from this. And what my plea to you is, as Prof have said, is that we cannot lose if young Africans actually stand up and do our part. If we stood up and did our part, we can never lose as Africans. And so, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I cannot believe much on the points that Professor said. You know, he spoke to economic liberation. He spoke to, you know, the fact that we need to recognize that we are divided, and that, you know, we need to regain our self-confidence in order for us to, you know, to appreciate our Pan-African ideals. And he said that we also need to reawaken, you know, the residual consciousness, that which actually, you know, he spoke to the fact that, you know, the Kwame Nkrumahs back in the days, they survived the education system because of that residual consciousness that he spoke about. And so, most importantly, he spoke to the issue of cultural dominance, that it is very critical that as we are teaching culture, as we are selling it to our children, as we are selling it, you know, in our songs, through our arts, through our music, you know, whose culture are we selling? And now, you know, we need to come back to our own cultures and sell it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I'm just going to go quickly to the questions both on Facebook and on Zoom platform to see who's got questions for Prof. Oh my God. Absolutely interesting. Really interesting discussion there. Okay, so Prof, there's a question for you, sir. There's a question for you there. It is saying, Ashe, didn't say the surname. Ashe says that, where do we start? The conversation is there, we're having it. Where do we start? How do we counter Western interference at a political level? And then I think that let's just quickly go on to the second question there. The second question is from Chikumbuzo Gangira, the youth rep at the African Union Southern Africa Regional Office. He's asking whose interest are we, the African youth, promoting? I think that question is rather, you know, directed to young people who are participating in this webinar, to say whose interests are we promoting really. And so let's go on to the next questions. Let's see if there's any other question. I'd like to read a comment really from Mabaka Lucky. He's saying that he's a 21-year-old and he's very grateful for joining this webinar. What Prof is saying is it's an eye-opener. And I so believe that it is such an eye-opener even to myself and to everybody else who is actually joining us. So Prof, I think we can go ahead and answer Ash's question as of where do we start in terms of countering Western interference at a political level.
Thank you very much. I believe that we have started. The West will always interfere. Remember that the West, in their very uncanny way, have always retained the strings of dominance. And these strings of dominance are very subtle. And this is why you continue to have organizations such as the Commonwealth. I mean, when we regained our independence, why do you think the Commonwealth is there? And the Commonwealth, the permanent head of the Commonwealth is the British monarch. The French also have an organization for their former colonies, the Portuguese for their former colonies. In my view, if we have an African Union, why do we need these bodies? We don't need them. And the sooner we realize this, the better for us. Right now, even as we talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area, The British are now moving from capital to capital, entering into bilateral agreements with individual African countries, while ECOWAS treaty, the Maghreb, East Africans say we should not enter into these bilaterals. It is our own weakness, because as long as we are divided, then we become desperate and weak. You imagine to yourself a country, and I'm mentioning a country such as, say, Togo. The GDP of Togo is not more than 3 billion United States dollars. That is the GDP of Togo. Now, the Togolese president pretends to be negotiating bilaterally with the Chinese president. It's a joke, because Jack Ma has more money than the Togolese combined at any one time. But suppose that Togo were to negotiate within the context of ECOWAS. You are then talking about a population of nearly 400 million. This is what we must do. We must know that individually we are weak. And I hope that with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we are going to do that. And there must be leaders who are standing up to this. This is one of the reasons why the Nkurumas were very strong, because they stood out. And I see a few leaders doing that, not as firmly as they should, but through the African Union now is a very weak organization, which is manipulated by France and China. So we need, unfortunately, we are not going to change the leadership in the African Union, but I hope it is something that could happen, so that we have somebody who is more vibrant, who does not look to Paris as the engine. But unfortunately, that is not going to happen. So unity demands that we are united. It is the nature of the world and is in the nature of true, real politics. His Excellency, the Ambassador, will tell you, interference is part of human affairs. It will always be there. Even African Union, when we become strong, we'll want to interfere for our interest. Our duty is to ensure that we are strong enough to resist interference and to convert interference into cooperation of equal partners. China, you now cannot deal with China rather than on their terms. And we have seen it in their lifetime. In my lifetime, I've seen China convert into something that the West fears. In my lifetime, I've seen Japan do the same thing. In my lifetime, I've seen even Brazil, to a certain extent, doing that. It can be done. Sometimes when I see a little country like Rwanda standing up, it tells you what can happen, or Tanzania standing up. South Africa could stand up. Even in your own country at one time, I think you stood up on the question of gold and other things. So it tells you that if we stand up, we will resist the West and they will be disciplined, because the West is a very arrogant entity. The conceptual West is very arrogant. And their arrogance is informed by their interests, which are essentially economic. China is very subtle. China pretends to be your friend. They never smile. They don't do anything. They have a deadpan expression. But if you want a stadium, they give it to you. They don't ask any question. So they look very harmless, but they are very harmful. And the problem of Africa is that throughout the ages, we have been too trusting. We trust people. We trusted the Portuguese. And once we trust them, they behave like they come. You remember the story of the Trojan horse. They come in. So we must now realize that the West, even when they are bearing gifts, we must not trust them. We must deal with them, but we must not trust them. And you of the younger generation, you have a duty, heavy duty. You are not competing with just within Africa. You are competing with young Chinese. You are competing with young Europeans. You are competing with young Asians. And look at the way India, we don't speak about it. But the India has a population of 1.2 billion, China 1.4 billion. Africa, I think we are 1.6 billion because we don't even count ourselves properly. We have even made our population a political issue. When we count ourselves properly, we are possibly 1.6 billion. If we united, who can interfere with us? To me, unity lies. And the other second thing with which I conclude was not a question. You young people, it is your time to organize. Once you are organized and that you have this particular arrangement that you have pulled into your conversation today, His Excellency the Ambassador, you have pulled the professor, you have pulled the good lady from Jamaica. This is the beginning of it. This is the beginning of it. Just work on it and let it be Pan-African. In 5 years, if God gives us life, we'll be telling a totally different story. So soldier on, soldier on.
Very much, Prof. I would like for you to take just 2 more questions from the participants here. I see Henry Kazula all the way from Tanzania. Henry says that great insights from all speakers. How can Africa regain political freedom if we keep on relying financially to drive development plans from so-called developed countries? Where are we failing to become financially independent? And then Tebe Cassidy says that he believes that economic independence must be at the core of Pan-Africanism in the 21st century. If we can have peace and stability within our continent, then we can, then our economies can do well enough for us to have, there's no question in there. But however, let's see if there is any other question. There's no other question, but I'd like to take the comment from Madam Mariam. Can you go up? Thank you very much. Madam Wadusi said to us that, no, back. Yeah, there's a particular one that she mentioned.
Yes,
right. Okay.
As I said, I think the professor has basically touched. Yeah, the professor had hit the nail on the head. He says we will always be weak if we work individually. We will always be weak, which is what I said earlier, is that dopino who fi frighten. Yeah, if we continue to be working individually, we will always be weak. So we have to work towards unity. We have to work towards being stronger, and strength only comes with togetherness. It's like the ant. The ant on its own will always be vulnerable, but as a colony, you cannot beat the ant. So we have to work together. It's inevitable, and we have started, but we have to recognize that we have got the enemies are within, and we have to start looking at the enemies within and start filtering out. We do. So as I said, dopino who fi frighten.
Thank you so much, madam. So, Prof, please go ahead and
thank you. Just one question.
Yes, thank you,
one question from Kazula. Kazula, just to tell you, I'll give you examples from your own country, Tanzania. You held your elections, it was fully financed from Tanzania. You had a budget of 330 billion, which was from Tanzania, no foreign donor, you only used 264. Great. You are currently building the Julius Nyerere Dam being done by the Egyptians after you abandoned the Chinese. It is fully financed. It tells you that it can be done. The gold, acacia, I think from Australia and other countries had not paid the Tanzanian tax for 20 years. President Magufuli ensured that they pay tax. Africa can finance our activities if we indeed supply and ensure that people pay taxes. Most of these companies from Europe go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are people lifting coltan from Eastern Congo on a daily basis. They don't pay tax to the Kinshasa administration. And that is why, and I hear my friend from Jamaica, my dear sister from Jamaica has put it very well. The thing you said in some Creole or some slang was very beautiful. I hope I can get it. But it simply means if you are small, you'll be fried. And right. If you are big, we cannot be fried. So Kazula, it can be done. And that is why we were saying, if you start with East African community and East African community is strong, we are 230 million in East African community. You go to SADC, you have another 300 million. You go to ECOWAS, you have another 400 million. You go to Central Africa, another 200 million. You go to the Maghreb, give it another 200 million. You go to the diaspora, another 250 million. We are essentially nearly 1.8 billion. As I speak to you now, the African Americans only are worth 2 trillion. African Americans are worth 2 trillion, which is the same as the entire GDP of all African companies combined. Suppose they were to say that they are only dedicating 40% of that money to create a true Pan-African bank, so that we have an African Development Bank in which the diaspora has 40%, we eliminate the Americans, we eliminate the Irish. Would we be going to the IMF? Would we be going to the Chinese? Would we be terminating our deals on the dollar? The dollar is important to the Americans because whatever you do internationally, whether it's oil or gold, it is ultimately terminated in dollar. Suppose we started terminating our activities in a currency called the Afro. I mean, there are so many opportunities, and I'm not even one of the best thinkers in this regard. I'm simply a pretender. If you get the individuals who actually know the things, there is no limit to what we can do. I want to conclude by saying, look at now the COVID situation. Africa is sitting. We are waiting for a vaccine from Moderna's. We are waiting for a vaccine from Oxford. We are waiting for a vaccine from Pfizer. We are waiting for a vaccine from Asia. We are waiting for a vaccine from Russia. How do we know what is in those vaccines? How can a whole population sit down and wait to consume something whose contents they do not know? How can we? And yet we have scientists who ought to be working. When the Malagasy Institute of Applied Science came with COVID organic, most Africans dismissed it. I thought that institutions in different parts of Africa would look at that particular product and use it so that we create an African vaccine. These are the things that I want to hear happening. And the good professor, we who have been in the academy, I think we have let Africa down. We consume things that are made, whether we are in the arts or in the sciences, and our governments have let us down. Because how much money do African governments dedicate to research and development? Today, we are praising the Nigerian who participated in the Pfizer vaccine. Shouldn't he be celebrated in Abuja? Shouldn't he have done it in Abuja so that we'll now be talking about our own vaccine? So there are so many things that can and ought to be done that sometimes I think that our baby steps, we are maturing in our babyhood, so that really, which is sad. I think we ought to move a little faster. And once again, I can't reiterate that one of the beautiful things that have happened during COVID is the recognition by Africans, people of African origin, wherever they are, that the mothership is the continent. And that they may be where they are, because we are not just about to abandon Jamaica. That is also ours. We are not just about to abandon Antigua and Barbuda and Barbados, and those are also ours. But those are satellites. The mothership, once the mothership is strong, you always know that you can go back and dock. And that is what we are working on. So Kazula, don't worry, it's going to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Prof, for those insights. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to believe that we're going to keep that fire burning. Absolutely. And without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I will not reiterate what Prof said to us just now. But however, I will advise everybody else who's actually joining us through the social media platforms or through the Zoom platform to actually go on and keep on asking those questions, to keep on, sending in those comments. We will see them. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, allow me to go on with our program. And at this point in time, I'm going to, to call on Ambassador Malayin Mohammed, who is the ambassador of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic to Botswana and a permanent representative to the Southern Africa Development Community. He's going to just shine a light on the Sahrawi issue there that I want to believe that also, Prof actually also highlighted earlier on, and he will talk to cooperation and independence imperatives. So, Ambassador, we welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. I think that for most of Africans, they don't know what Western Sahara is or Sahrawi Republic, because some colonialists think that they can push us out of the mothership that you just mentioned. And others think that we don't deserve to be Africans, to be independent, to gain our independence like the rest of Africa did. The fight for Pan-Africanism and for Africa, for this mothership that you just mentioned, as all of you have been saying, is not only by decolonizing the people, by decolonizing the academia, by decolonizing our economy, our history, our narrative, because we don't control even our narrative and our history. We are leaving it to other people to tell us who we are and to tell us even where we should go. This is one of the main problems that we are still facing as a generation. We don't know our roots. We don't know each other. If you ask any African, anywhere, about, like, take for example, Southern Africa, and ask them about North Africa, any country, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, many would even think that those countries are not Africans. But if you go to the fight, to the history of these countries, you'll find that Algeria fought for Africa maybe more than any other African country. Mm-hmm. You will find that Libya under Muammar Gaddafi fought for Africa maybe more than many other African countries. But still, we don't have the connection. And I think that this is due first to the resignation, if you want, of our elite. They're not there. Our elite is not in this fight, unfortunately. They're fighting other fights. They're looking up to other cultures, other countries, and they're forgetting the mothership. They don't look to what this mothership really needs to rise up, because we have everything we have in Africa. You need resources? We have it. We have everything. We have culture. We are very rich in languages, in histories, in music, in everything. But we look down to all what we have, and we think that civilization, that the perfect thing is the West, or what is Western, which is a very big mistake. So my country is one of the examples of how Pan-Africanists and Africans are failing their mothership. Because unless Western Sahara is independent, unless we all contribute to the liberation of the people of Western Sahara, because they're Africans, like it or not, you can't start flying the mothership without us. We will not let you go, because we have a right, and we are on this continent, members of this continent, and we're fighting for this continent. We have been fighting with South Africans, with Namibians, with Angolans when they were under occupation. We fought, the small people of Western Sahara. We fought with our brothers, because we knew that our destiny is linked together. We cannot compete with the colonizers individually. We cannot. We are very small if we are individuals, very poor, very weak. We only can compete. We only can fight back if we are a union. And we only can be union if we build our house on basis, strong, fundamental basis, principles. We cannot allow any country, any nation in Africa to or overlook its neighbor. This is your neighbor, this is your brother. You should respect him, respect his culture, respect his views and his visions first. forming a family. I cannot be a member of your family if you're despising me, killing me, pushing me away. How can I be part of that? So I think that principles, and we have them all. We have them in the Constitutive Act of the African Union. The literature is there. The ideas are there. We only need to implement them and to be very strict in implementing them, not allowing any country, any nation to think that it can do with these principles, violate them as it wish, like what Morocco, unfortunately, a brother African, is doing in the Sahrawi Republic. So I don't think that I have much to say about this discussion, because you mentioned the main issues. There's a lot of things, a lot of challenges that we have to face as Pan-Africanists, but the main thing, in my humble opinion, is to reignite Pan-Africanism in the new generation. This is the bet. They don't understand what Pan-Africanism is. They don't understand who they are. How can they understand what Pan-Africanism is, what the fight and what they're struggling for? I saw one of the questions, which is very interesting, saying whose interest are we promoting as young Africans? You are promoting your future. You are promoting your kids' future. You are promoting new generation, because as individuals, we only live for 60 years, or 50 years, for 70 years maybe. But we have to leave a legacy to our kids. This is what the forefathers left to us, a dream, a vision, very clear. They didn't leave anything unclear. Everything that they designed was clear. They said that we must decolonize our countries first. We must build our union. We must save our economy. This is what they said. Vision is there. But we also must now decolonize our minds. We have to decolonize our minds. We have to wake up and see the might that Africa holds. Unless we do that, unless we believe that we really have all the ingredients, as Professor said, to be the mightiest nation, the mightiest power on earth, unless we see that, then we have to see it collectively. We cannot leave anyone behind. We cannot accept anyone who is in our mothership like a cancer. We have to bring every single nation and government to order. These are our principles as Africans, and we have to respect them first. Then, only then, we will see Africa rising. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador. And for us who actually do not know about what is currently going on in Western Sahara, Ambassador touched on that to say that we see, the African brother being Morocco, continuously violating what we call human rights, what we call, it actually, they're not even supposed to be doing that, but you see to this point in day, you just Google Western Sahara, you will see the headline saying the Africa's only remaining colony. And some of you were born in an era that, we didn't even know what colonialism looks like. We didn't even get to feel what it was and all of that. We hear about it in our literature, in books and all of that, but you never got to understand. So go to Western Sahara, research about what is happening there as a young person, then identify what is your role in terms of liberating Western Sahrawi. So ladies and gentlemen, looking at my time here, what I'm going to request, Ambassador, is for us to go to the last speaker before we take on all the questions. And then we can take all the questions together and, we can tackle them. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that, allow me to just go to our last, speaker for the day, who is Mr. Douglas Tiako. and he is an editorial consultant. And for him, he's going to be touching on a very, very important aspect of Pan-Africanism. That is the role of media in promoting Pan-African ideals in the 21st century. So can you please just, take it up? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I must correct the young Pan-Africanist first. You promoted me a little too much. When you first introduced us, you said that I was a consultant for a whole lot of newspapers. It's only two, actually. I wish it was the case that I was a consultant for many more of them. Anyway, thank you very much. The Venerable Professor Nkrumah ably described imperialism as one of two agents of colonialism. I want to say, in addition to that, that multinationalism, the multinational corporations are very key agents of imperialism. And this whole continent is under the yoke of Western multinational corporations. And most of the time, citizens of our countries are very happy to see more and more of these multinational corporations playing a part, we think, in development of our economies, when in fact, all they are doing is underdevelop our economies and to make sure that Africans remain very poor when the citizens of their countries have better jobs by processing these resources. We do the menial jobs of extracting at extraction level, especially mineral resources. And I will use the diamond sector in this country as an illustration of this. An incident happened, and I will use this incident also to try to illustrate that the basic job of a journalist, especially in these present times when the yoke of imperialism in the form of multinational corporations becoming stronger and stronger and weighing heavier and heavier on our necks, to illustrate how that can impede a greater thinking towards reunifying Africa, because the founders of even at a conceptual level of Pan-Africanism did achieve some degree of success. But what we have seen in the succeeding years is actually something of a reversal, because after gaining, especially at the end of the 1960s and the close of the 1970s, you had just about all of the African continent, most of the countries there independent from their colonial masters, the colonial countries. But what you have seen, which was quite a considerable achievement, but what we have seen progressively is a reversal of that gain in the form of multinational corporations multiplying in their numbers to make sure that it remains only at that level. Political independence with political administration, perhaps even without any radical thinking to advance things from that point further. The incident that I referred to in the diamond industry, in the diamond sector in this country, happened, I think, around 1987. I cannot be sure. A young, suave man, very swanky too, even from his clothes, a young executive of Anglo-American stroke De Beers. Sometimes it's very difficult to tell these apart because they're basically one and the same thing. By the name of Clem Santa, came to Botswana to promote a book that he had just published, the title of which was South Africa in the 1990s. Predictably, it all amounts to a very neo-colonial outlook on how to reinforce the presence of these multinational empires, De Beers and through the Botswana, De Beers and Anglo-American in countries like Botswana and further afield. I made sure that I went and sat among the VIPs. And I'm not very sure that I had the right tickets to go and sit there. But I did go and secure myself a seat there. And when I looked, I found that I was actually sitting right behind President Kitumila Masire. And I thought this is good, but because this is the one man here in this audience that must hear the questions that I believe I will have. Clemsanta made his presentation, after which I took the opportunity to raise questions. And I said to Clemsanta, it cannot be my mistake that the Botswana or the Beers or Anglo-American is securing the best students in Botswana when they exit secondary school at Form 5, the very best, especially in the key subjects of mathematics and science. And it takes these children, these young people, and takes them to the best, what is supposed to be the best schools for mining engineering in the world. Most of them went to Canadian schools for mining engineering. And they performed superbly. Year after year after year, they were being applauded. And this is one intake after another, one intake after another, of having outperformed the very best of their equals from other countries, including their equal numbers from the so-called first world. But when these young Botswana come back home to assume jobs at the companies that sent them to school, they find in place white South Africans with lesser qualifications, many of them having done poorly at matric level. They are their bosses. The best qualifications they would have would be as artisans. They are their bosses. And then they, because these young people don't have a choice, the Beers stroke Anglo-American stroke Botswana are the only employer in the field, in the area of their study. They have nowhere else to go, so they stay. But after some time, through natural progression and a policy that was never really effective in this country called localization, when they should qualify to assume, to be promoted, to assume greater responsibilities, because they know they have been among the best in the world, they would be sent to a school in Johannesburg, owned and run by this conglomerate, Anglo-American, Botswana, De Beers, for what do they call it? They had for upgrading. In the time that they are upgrading in Johannesburg, in Botswana, in Orapa at that time, because it was just about the only mine that was on stream, diamond mine that was on stream at the time, the contracts of these artisans are renewed for another 5 years, for another 10 years. So these young fellows come back from having learned nothing in Johannesburg, where they went supposedly for upgrading. And they become frustrated, but they stay on because they have no choice. And this thing went on and on and on. And I put it to Clemsanta, this very suave fellow, that the principal of that school is a racist. How is it possible that in this present day, you can find a fellow like that who, upon being asked a question by a journalist, responded, the problem with Africans is that they don't respond to aptitude testing. The problem with Africans is that they don't respond to aptitude testing. That insult has stayed in my head ever since. And I said to Clemsanta, he found it very difficult to say I was wrong because he knew that this was true. And I said, but how can you? Botswana and De Beers and Anglo-American almost run the economy of this country. And you send the best of our young people to a school run by a person with this type of attitude. What can we expect? He found himself in a difficult position, but I felt maybe I am bringing a disorder upon my president, but I marched on all the same. And I said to Clem Santa, are you also aware that your conglomerate is very selective regarding what area of mining engineering Botswana students go to study? It is only extraction engineering. And it cannot be by mistake. Yet your policy at Botswana stroke De Beers Anglo-American is diamonds for development. You are underdeveloping these young people. You are underdeveloping this country to ensure that there is no processing which can add value and create more employment. This is delivered. That has been so. I asked these questions, even as I thought I was perhaps embarrassing my president, because it is the duty of an African journalist to ask these questions, not to assume that what they are being given is true. Diamond for development as a policy and as a slogan of these companies that are extracting our diamonds is not in the least meaningful at all. It is diamonds at the very most for underdevelopment. And I pointed this to Clem Santa. To illustrate this, De Beers' first mine in Botswana came on stream in Orapa in 1971. How many years ago has that been? Today, there is not a single Botswana, not a single citizen that has learned the skills of taking one little fraction of a stone to turn it into a diamond, a ring like this. Only 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was editing a story that for the upteenth time brought tears to my eyes. Louis Vuitton is being appointed to process one of the largest stones discovered and unearthed in Botswana by an Australian company. It is never a company from another African country. No, De Beers will give it to a company from another Caucasian country. It is Louis Vuitton and HB, something. I think HB is Belgium. If you are not well-versed in the ideal of Pan-Africanism, as a journalist, you find yourself celebrating these stories. There is nothing to celebrate about these stories. And if journalists of my age, of my generation, find nothing wrong with these stories and find nothing wrong with asking further questions why it should still be so, what then of the younger generation of journalists that come after us? This is pathetic. Clem Santa did not enjoy his tour of Botswana to promote his book, because in the end he had to admit that the policies of his conglomerate, and he was full of energy. Unfortunately, I punctured it a bit, because he had just married into the family. He had just married a daughter of Harry Oppenheimer and had just been promoted to head the platinum division of Anglo-American. So you can imagine the level of verve that he had when he came on that tour. And I am saying these things, and whenever I have had an opportunity to be in a position to teach the younger generation of journalists, I have said this conglomerate is to be looked at as a reason for the underdevelopment of this country. And for a reason, as the reason for the inertia, even in the mind of the political leadership in this country. At the very least, we should be taking the example of Middle Eastern countries, Dubai, which is the destination and the dream of every young African who does not understand what is going on in their own countries. The value of diamonds, depending on the market, sometimes exceeds the value of oil. But Dubai has come to be what it is today because of the policies that they negotiated. They, like Botswana, did not have companies, that oil drilling companies that they could use to drill their own oil, but they negotiated better policies. And they are now a part of the imperialist world because Africans go there as slaves. Africans go there and Asians go there as slaves. Perhaps we would not have wanted to go in that direction of enslaving other nations, other people, but at least would be at a level of self-respect as a diamond producing nation. We are now towards the tip end of the lifespan of our diamond mines, but there isn't an indigenous company that processes diamonds. The relocation of the diamond, what do they call it? To turn Botswana, Gaborone into a diamond city was a joke that just confuses figures of the balance of trade. Because what is happening now is that Botswana exports diamonds in raw form and re-imports them for diamond, for what is it called? Israeli companies that stayed here for a few years. It's very few of them that are left now. We're here for a few years so that we could believe that there had been a relocation of something from London to Botswana. I will tell you why I say it is the duty of journalists Pan-African with the Pan-Africanist ideal to ask. I see them celebrating these things. Whereas Tel Aviv in Israel, that country that was imposed upon Palestine, Tel Aviv has a very prosperous diamond industry, but they don't produce a single stone of diamonds. Much of the diamonds are obviously from Botswana because the production in Botswana amounts to about 70% of worldwide production. And some of the companies that have made Tel Aviv the glittering city that it is today were started after 1971. They are younger. They have been in existence for a shorter time than the PS has been in Botswana, than the first mine that came on stream in 1971 in Warab. The saddest story is here. That results because journalists don't ask the right questions. I was speaking about a moment ago about Louis Vuitton, and we are supposed to celebrate this. In fact, young people celebrate this because they all think that it is, as Professor Nkrumah said earlier, we think that something made in Belgium is better than something made here. Every young person here wants to be seen. A young lady wants to be seen in a, her clutching a Louis Vuitton bag. Well, I mentioned that earlier. But you see, the sad thing is that somehow in the so-called free market system that's promoted by the West and imposed on us, somehow Israel is nearer Joanie than the communities that are just next door. The communities of Basar, the indigenous people, whose history is a history of dispossession and being run off by them. In a half-hearted policy, a very controversial policy, The government is trying to ensure that the children of Basaro, of indigenous people in this country, get some degree of formal education. So there are primary schools with boarding facilities around the world's best and richest diamond mine, around 20. The poverty in those communities and those hamlets is a story of horror. Right outside the world's richest diamond mine, the young girls use foam. They rip it off foam mattresses and use it as absorbent when they are having their menstrual periods. They have no access to the mine. Tel Aviv has access to that mine. This is the pain of imperialism and the pain of journalists who don't ask the right questions. There is an inexplicable failure to link these children just outside the mine and their total objection with the policies of this, the BS, the Botswana Anglo-American conglomerate. The purchasing office of this conglomerate for the Botswana is based in Johannesburg. It gets cruder and cruder. You hardly ever find the purchasing office of any company based outside. Yes, we know that they are controlled from foreign capitals, blah, blah. But the purchasing office, this is to ensure that Botswana companies will receive the least, if anything at all, when it comes to tendering for jobs. Companies owned by these Burkisians, sons of white South Africans, because apartheid is as strong today as it ever was in South Africa, that the best tenders, the best contracts from Botswana will go to those white companies, disguised as what do they call it? This program to assist, yes, as Black economic empowerment. It is a sad story. But anyway, that is, I'm saying this to try to illustrate, because if you take the multiplier effect of this conglomerate in Botswana, you multiply it by 52, because the same type of situation obtains in just about all African countries, and in much of the so-called third world. Then you can see how multinational corporations represent imperialism at the highest level. To pull back even the little gains of the independence movement that ended around the 1970s. You take a country like South Korea. The movies, even though they are bad, but they can teach you something. You don't need to go to South Korea to see that South Korea, before it underwent this revolution that has now placed it in the league of the first world, so-called first world, was just about the same as rural Zambia, rural Botswana, was just about the same as that. In certain respects, the quality and standard of life in our countries was even better. But because of a radical thinking, within less than half my lifetime, I'm in my early 60s, South to brag about their brands. And they have rebaptized us because we want to be seen to be wearing a watch with a South Korean name or Japanese name. This is what is the pathetic story of African journalists that refuse to raise the same questions. I will conclude with another sad episode. My good friend here, Professor Sebina, and the Venerable Professor Mourinho have mentioned in the presentations the value of education, especially the right type of education instilled in young people, that this cannot be overemphasized. But you see, increasingly, when I was younger, we knew about Saint Valentine and nonsense like that as something peripheral. But you know, we had the best girls. I can tell you that. Yeah. You know. But today, it started with just one day, the 28th of February, being promoted as the most romantic day on the calendar, on the Christian calendar. Then now it has been extended to a whole month. They call it the month of love. In the diaspora of Black Africa, there is a great effort to promote February as Black History Month. No, they don't understand what you're talking about. You can ask them about who is the king of Botswana, who was based in Krugersdorp centuries ago, who gave birth to some of the three major, so-called major tribes in this country. They don't know, but they will compete and out-compete each other about, what's his name? Saint Valentine. And go and fight over their girls because they told a better tale about Saint Valentine. This is pathetic. Something somewhere is wrong. The syllabus must also be revisited because in our time, the teachers were energetic and full of zeal about what it means to be an African in a horrible world that had just been reluctant to grant us independence. The teachers were full of that energy to instill in our minds that you have to grow up to become a responsible citizen that will defend this independence. And defending this independence obviously means taking it a step higher and a step higher at all times. Absolutely. Young people today, I'm afraid, including my own children, don't give the least care about these values. So it's a greater challenge that Professor Sabina and Professor Nkrumah you have, because you have a great opportunity. You stand in front of these young people so many times, in a week. So the content, the substance of what they are taught, it has to be revisited. And there is nothing wrong. I've seen it happen in other countries with making sure that the university does not become a white elephant. And that is done. One means of doing that is to keep inviting people from outside the university that are not a part of the university community as visiting lecturers. Because in that, the university is at all times in touch with the real world. And that when these visiting lecturers, they have to be selected very carefully, because it matters also what it is that they will impart to the students. When they stand in front of these young minds, it is to leave these minds with a good impression of the greater assignment that they have once they leave the gates of those universities.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. Oh my God. I don't know. Am I the only one who is getting emotional? Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause to Mr. Douglas. And another one for Ambassador. Thank you so much. And with that, the role of media in redefining Africa's true reflection of what is happening. I mean, what we're seeing in media today is the poorest of the poor and black kids with ants, and if not it's ants, if it's flies all over and everything. To say that somehow we are super, we have no hope. But you hear stories of Sir Douglas, saying to us, that indeed it is, we are able, in fact, to continue the fight and win the battle through the media, through the young people. Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me just look at maybe 2 questions. Due to time constraints, we're going to take 2 or so questions, and then we'll be able to go on to the closing. I know that we are already over what we wanted on our program, though we said that is for 3 hours, but let's just look at how we can, look at, some of the questions that are there for our participants, for our speakers. Okay, that is a thank you message. And oh man, the story for Botswana about diamonds. Okay, great. Is that a question? Okay, it's a comment. It's a comment. Ladies and gentlemen, you didn't ask questions. Okay. Ashe says, how do we take back control of our investment or trade treaties and tax treaties? I don't know if we can take that, or if we have Prof on the line, Professor Lumumba, if we still have him on the line, then I think he can take up that. Unless if you want to make comment to the question that Ashe just asked. Yes. The question says, how do we take back control of our investment or trade treaties and tax treaties? Okay. Because he's saying that this is exactly where the problem lies in relation to the DBS case that you just mentioned. Okay, if we do not have that, then I would like to say that, let me give my speakers less than a minute to just give you one last statement, a message, or a statement, or it can be a keyword of some sort that we as the young people of Africa, or as participants today, can go home and reflect on. So I'm gonna start with Sir Douglas while he's still on fire. One statement, sir, to the young people today regarding, especially young journalists, regarding their role in really impacting Pan-Africanism ideals. I have a very, it's a very sad thing here in Botswana, especially because I often say, young journalists, especially in my country, are more interested in UN stuff, Commonwealth stuff, or something of that sort. But when you talk about African issues, hardly ever do you even see them covering such issues that are very pertinent to Africa's development. So one statement from you to the young journalists.
I think they've got to be on their marks, because if they don't do that, another sad story is about to start. There's oil has just been discovered in the Okavango. And if we don't learn from what we have done with diamonds, because it's almost a story that cannot be recorded. If we don't learn, and I think there are a lot of lessons to learn from that, then when the last barrel of that oil is taken out of the earth, we will be the poorer. We are the poorer for our diamonds. We will be the poorer for our oil. And the sad story, there has to be, they have to tread very carefully, but not taking instructions from anyone. The Okavango is also a World Heritage Site because it is effectively a garden of God right there with all the creatures that have been created on earth. including as human beings. So the ecosystems there, we have to be careful that the balance is not disturbed when these multinational corporations come here again we have to be careful. It has to be because we don't have anything that we can do. We don't have oil drilling companies, but we've got to be able to negotiate for a better deal. Because I'm told now that President Masisi has become very unpopular with multinational corporations because he's trying to secure, with the last remaining stones, a better deal for Botswana. I think we should give him greater support. These young journalists must give him greater support as he moves into the Okavango for oil.
Absolutely.
As we move into the Okavango.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Douglas. And as for you, Professor Sabina, your last words to young academia out there in terms of promoting Pan-Africanism in our continent and the diaspora.
Yeah, thank you. I can only say sharpen your spears, because what has been described, especially in the field of academia and education, is what is called what I may refer to as epistemic violence. Violence is being done to the unborn child, the young ones, the future of our continent. So we need to strengthen our defenses, conceptual defenses, and wage the struggle. So in terms of thinking, we need to wake up. Absolutely. In terms of reorientating the education systems, our thinking capacity, our memories, our vision, sharpening our vision. We need to continue the fight.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, just as Prof have said, let us as academia rethink our role in Africa's development agenda. And I want to believe that earlier on, Professor Lumumba actually touched on that aspect to say that academia actually is partly led to the failing, to Africa where it is today, because they failed to actually, continue the fight and force the fight, using academics, And as for you, Ambassador Malainen, ladies and gentlemen, as our co-host as well, Ambassador Malainen, please, your last words to the young people, to the international community out there regarding the situation in Sahrawi Republic.
Well, I will speak bigger than just Sahrawi Republic, because in Western Sahara, I want you to know that we are fighting.
Yes.
We have never stopped fighting for our rights, and we have never given up the fight just because other people didn't help or other people didn't come to assist us. This is what I want to say to Africans, especially the youth. You have no excuses, because you have all the means to understand who you are. You have the internet, you have access to the whole world, something that your forefather didn't have. So you must act, you must do things, start doing things for Africa. Stop thinking or asking what your government, what your fathers will do for you. You have to do things for Africa. I think that this is the mission of the coming generation, is to bring up Africa and rise up. They have the means to do it. They should start doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ambassador Mohammed there. He's saying that as African youth, you are custodians of your own development, and it is time for you to rise up because you have all the means and therefore have no excuse, to keep on asking, what is it that my government can do for me? But he is asking you instead, to start asking yourself questions of what you can do for your own continent. And ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I'm going to be going all the way to Accra, Ghana, to join Ms. Wudasi Mariam. Your last statements to our audience today, ma'am.
My last statement to the youths: look within yourself, know yourself, start understanding yourself. Make sure that you are You are writing your own narrative. No one writes your narrative for you. You write your narrative. Look to Africa for your solution. Everyone is coming to Africa for their solution, and we are going elsewhere for our solution. No, Africa has got everything we need to survive. Everything we need is here. So please galvanize yourself, organize yourself, get into organizations and start making sure that you can manipulate the situation to your benefit, because everything you need is here. Don't look anywhere else. There's nowhere else to look. Look at what is happening right now. At the moment, Africa is not suffering as Europe and America is suffering. Why? Because Africa has got everything that we need. The bushes and the trees have got a reason to be there. The fishes in the sea has got a reason to be there. Everything we need is here. Please. So look within yourself, understand each other, find mechanisms and ways of getting to know each other, of getting on with each other, to be cohabiting peacefully. That's what we need to do. And start uniting ourselves, make us strong. Yes, because on our own, we are weak. As I said, dopino who for frightened.
Thank you. Gosh, thank you so much, ma'am. I so wish I could know how to actually, pronounce that just as you beautifully do. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I'm just going to quick check if we still have Professor Lumumba. I anticipate he had rushed. Yes, yeah, because he only had 20 minutes. Yes, absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, on my schedule here, it says that it is time for thanking you for actually even participating, for taking your precious time to be joining us today. And most importantly, I'd like to take this opportunity really to thank all our speakers today for their insights, for their wisdom, and for the words of encouragement, for having taken, that precious time out of that very busy schedules, to share insights with us African youth and everybody else who was participating today. And I can tell you this, for me, after this, I'm definitely gonna try to do my part when it comes to the aspect or the issue of our Western Sahrawi. And then also what I'm also going to be doing is to learn very much about Pan-Africanism, and even what is it that is my role today in promoting Pan-Africanism ideals today. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm also going to take this opportunity to to thank the organizing team that put all of this together in such a very short space. And first, I'd like to thank Mike, all the way from Ghana, and then it's unfortunate you can't see him on the camera. You can see, we can see you, right? Yay! This is my absolutely. So that is Mike, ladies and gentlemen. He's the guy behind the camera. And then also, I would like to take this moment to thank Tapiwa Anifasi, that is the secretariat at African Union Youth Club. You also can come through so that the people can see you. Absolutely, absolutely. And then I would also like to thank friend, and thank you everybody for actually attending. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is a wrap from me, Shamil Ahosi, an image consultant, but yet again, a development practitioner. I'm very careful about that word now that I've heard from Professor Lumumba. But yes, I run an NGO. I'm also the chair for the PLO Foundation in Botswana. And then with me, my last you. Yes, ma'am.
Can we also thank you, Shamil? Yes, for being compared today. Well done.
Thank you so much. Coming from you, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And it was my last words to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And Ambassador, you want to say goodbye to the people?
Thank you very much for having us and for listening and sharing with us your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for attending. Let us keep the conversation going. Let us keep this discussion, burning up and all of that. I will be going back to the social media platforms and make sure that we respond to everyone's questions and comments that you've done. Thank you so much for the interaction. I'll thank you enough. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
you, my wonderful